My name is Bob Barsley. I'm the president of the American Academy of Forensic Sciences, and I have the great pleasure to welcome you to the plenary session of the 65th annual meeting of the AAFS. I don't wish to detract or subtract from the available time for our wonderful panel of speakers this morning, and speakers about whom you will hear more shortly, but I do have a few things to say. I'd be remiss if I did not take a moment to thank not only the audience, for being here and taking time from your busy meeting schedule and also time from your personal and private and business lives to be here in D.C., but also to thank the staff at AAFS for all the hard work that goes into producing a meeting such as this, a meeting which is just really beginning today. We've had workshops yesterday and the day before, but today is the first real serious meeting business, and then of course tomorrow and the next day with our other scientific presentations. I also wish to take this time to thank the co-chairs of this session, Max Hawk, Max was up there, he disappeared, and Marilyn Hustis, from whom you will hear more in a few minutes. Today's theme, and the overall theme of the meeting, is the forensic sciences, founded on observation and experience, improved by education and research. So I'm now going to relinquish the podium to Marilyn, right, who's going to introduce our speakers, and I wish that this will be a great 2 hours. I know it will be, and I look forward to hearing from all the speakers. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you all for coming. We're very excited about the program today, and this is certainly Bob's idea, his theme for the program, and we've looked forward to putting it together. And our first speaker today is Dr. Ann Bunch, and she's going to address the issue of observation. Ann is an associate professor of criminal justice at the College of Brockport, State University of New York, and she's a medical legal consultant for the Jefferson, Onondaga, ME offices.
Thank you very much. I'll begin the discussion of the topic at hand, focusing on observation, one of the bases for what we do in forensic science. In order to discuss any term, clearly we have to begin with a definition, and I take mine from Webster's dictionary. To observe is to perceive or to notice. To perceive, then, is to obtain knowledge of something through the senses, to see, to hear, etc. Thus, to observe or to perceive is a multisensory endeavor. We as humans emphasize the visual sense, along with other species such as raptors. Other primates, we have forward-facing eyes that allows for three-dimensional stereoscopic vision so that our fields of vision overlap, as you see in the diagram on your right. Other species, such as the canine, have other emphases, as you can see here. We employ them accordingly to detect items we and they cannot see. Another demonstration of our own alternative senses at work during observation would be a case that is broken when a detective gets reports of a foul odor emanating from a storage unit, or perhaps from the trunk of Casey Anthony's car. This is the trunk. That evidence can be the reason that a case is investigated in the first place and resolved. To pound the point further probably than I need to here, we also freely admit that auditory evidence is crucial at times to observe and perceive as forensic specialists. Phone calls, taped conversations, recordings, radio messages can be analyzed, assessed. Voice printing can be done to positively identify terrorist leaders, for example. The tactile sense, with a gloved hand or without. Perhaps taste come into play, although I'd say the latter probably not so much these days in the day and age of contamination. Thus, we must acknowledge that all or some of our senses are put to use when we are in the process of observing. So then, what is the difference between scientific versus casual observation? I think you would agree that scientific approach to the observation is systematic, organized, regularized, so as to increase objectivity, enhance the quality of the data collected. The question to the scientist then is how to do this, how to systematize. We ask questions like this: what data or information will be collected? When will I collect it? How often will I collect it? Where will it be collected? And how will it be collected? We come up with these answers to these important questions not in a vacuum, but based on the other topics that will be discussed today. So here's a research cycle, and you can find numerous of them throughout textbooks and research methods. I just chose one. The middle and the end of the session inform observation. So here's the process, and I have magnifying glasses to represent that observation is going on throughout this process. Education, research, and experience, our experience developed through time, inform our observations. We pick out variables, we identify what we're interested in looking at, we form a suggestion about, or prediction about how they're going to interact. Reality testing, I have numerous magnifying glasses here because that's when we intensify our observation. And all the senses should be alerted at this time, collecting data, experiment. This is reality testing, same meaning. Then we evaluate and figure out what happened, try to explain it, what patterns we saw, make suggestions about what's significant. And that in the background throughout this is our education and our research. The question we should ask, though, is our education based, what is our education based on? Were we steeped in a lot of theory, or was it a more practical type of education? Was our education based on our mentors' opinions and traditions, or was it based on validated research? So we need to think about it, our education and the research behind that when we're doing observation in the research cycle. Obviously, validated research is probably a better thing to rely upon when we're doing this. We have to be aware that biases are in place when we set up studies in our reality testing. They affect what we look for, what we expect to find, and the predictions we make. It really is unavoidable due to things like our training, our experience, not just our professional experience, but our personal experience, gender, culture. So all these things come in the background when we're making our observations. Thus, a reflexive approach to observation is generally the best practice. There's a lot of discussion about this in the social sciences and probably other disciplines of late, figuring out where the researcher lies in the research process. It's like a self-awareness. I call it a personal quality assurance, quality control. Now, it's being talked a lot about now, but it's not a new concept. Plato and Socrates discussed this finding yourself in your research back sometime after 399 BCE. Plato, quoting Socrates, mentioned that observation can become habitual and thus casual. Let me go back. He used the example of hands. We see them throughout our lives. We come to know what they look like, and thus the detail of the separate fingers and the differences between the hands might escape us as we have become habituated to looking at them. We have to work against this, is what Socrates said. In honor of President's Day and the Academy Awards coming up, I thought I would show this Lincoln illusion, which many or most of you have probably already seen. You see here two apparently different faces of Abraham Lincoln. One is inverted and one is upright, in the anatomical position, as it were. We see the anatomical face is lacking an important element, the eyes. Now, the important point is that the inverted face is also missing the eyes. And if you don't believe me, just invert your head and look at it. I would deconstruct the slide, but I don't have the time, so I would actually undo it and show you. If it tilts 90 degrees, you'll see the eyes are not there. So what's happening here? Our mind inserts the eyes for us. We have neurons that specialize in seeing faces, and the face needs to be in anatomical position in order for the neurons to see it as a face. If it's inverted, it sees it as an object, and the eyes are inserted to kind of better explain to ourselves the generalized face object. So this is just to say, don't inspect any evidence when it's upside down. And number two, don't trust your best sense 100% of the time. We are habituated. Our mind is programmed to some degree. Scene illusions. Now, we do overcome our limitations by adding things like alternative light sources and chemicals. So there are ways to overcome these limitations, and we have adapted them. A little more history, and I will not take a long time on this. Other scientists have weighed in throughout time on best practices. Aristotle talked about the loss of any sense being the loss of knowledge, and bemoaned the fact that we have difficulty observing certain phenomena like veins in the living body. Galen discussed how to see the function of kidneys, bladder, and ureters in a living thing with his vivisections depicted here. And he really blasted scientists who made statements that weren't based on empirical data. So we see here, back 200 AD, earlier than that, a push toward relying on empirically validated research, and a pushback on ad hoc opinions formed from anecdotal information. Harvey carried on Galen's work and explained the function of the circulation, and the circulation was happening. Darwin, we see here depictions that he made during his journey to the Galapagos Island. These representations of what he observed live on to show us and explain to us what he saw, demonstrating the specialization of species to certain eco-niches. So he's an exemplary scientist for documenting his observations. Speaking of evolution, Albert Einstein said in his volume Relativity that the evolution of science itself is based on observations. These observations lead to a system of thought which equals theory. Planck, in his posthumously published work, described the challenge of making observations as technological advances are made. He stated that intense attention to detail increases with scientific advance. The challenge becomes greater and greater for the observer. Around the same time, Locard was emphasizing detailed observation in forensic science, and also stated that the choice of observation technique is important, was dictated often by the latest technology available. Locard pushed observation further than ever before in criminal investigations, and even talked about how dust and dust particles can inform us about what happened at a scene. The current work at the Large Hadron Collider at the French border exemplifies the challenge and recent success of teams to detect the long-predicted Higgs boson, seen for a fleeting instant more than once in this particle accelerator, shows how far we can go in pursuit of observing the stuff we and everything are made up of. At some point, we have to ask ourselves, what are we going to be seeing in 10 years? As one of the scientists involved, Dr. Franklin of Harvard Physics states, in the end, what you need is to have your hands on things, fiddling and figuring stuff out. All right, how do we improve our observations that we make in scientific undertakings? Here are some recommendations that I came up with, giving some thought to the matter. Use the reflexive approach. Be aware of habituation, as Socrates suggested, in your thought and in your action. Know your limitations. Yeah, I picked Bones as my favorite superhero here. Know your limitations, although the CSI effect is out there and people say they can't believe that you do what you do and you're the real deal. They would love to be you. Don't let the CSI effect become the CIS effect. Don't let it go to your head. Know our limits. All right, take notes on the limitations and conditions of how you worked. What technologies did you use to enhance your senses, if any? Be flexible and aware of the new technologies available. Don't get stuck in your ways and think that's the only way to do things. Stay abreast of the literature. Encourage certification of yourself and others so that you and others can make best practices observations in the best practices way recommended by others that are certified. Monitor the quality of certification process within your own specialty for the future observers. One more thing, as Colombo said. The object of observation. Instead of being the observer here, I want to take the passive approach and talks about being the observed. So we are the fish in the bowl here. What about observation from without? The scientist doesn't work alone in a lab. We have to put this in context. We have bosses, colleagues, coworkers, interns, trainees, inspectors, accreditors, visitors, tours, students, family members, the media, other agencies we partner with, attorneys, judges, and jurors. All of these groups view scientists at work in the lab, in the field, in the courtroom, and create barriers or boundaries to our observations. Their expectations for what we are doing or should do may or may not be reasonable, but they are real. At times they've seen successes, other times failures. BTK, the case was broken with some surprising evidence. It led to the discovery of a person who may have gone undetected his entire life. He fit right into the community in many ways. On the other side, the O.J. Simpson trial, clearly a watershed event that caused some serious reflection on evidence handling and what we're doing as forensic scientists. How do we improve our performance from the position of being observed? Inform others about the limitations of forensic science as well as its applications. Do a reality check. If you are asked to give a talk at a school or a museum or a library, do it so that people know what we're really doing, what we can do, and what we can't. Educate people and the public about the real forensic science out there. Be aware of the context. Who's the audience you're talking to? Sometimes we would require sensitivity with family members. We wouldn't talk to them in the same way as peers. Maybe they're coming for a tour to your lab. Be sensitive as to what would be available for them to see. Use terms in your notes and reports that strive for clarity across disciplines. So while you're documenting your observations and you're writing what you saw, if you pass that to a colleague in another discipline, hopefully they'll understand what you saw with the clear, concise terms that are shared between our disciplines. Strive for openness, cooperative approach, transparency, follow your SOP. We have nothing to hide, we shouldn't have anything to hide. And remember, we are reflections of our science. Okay, one more observation of my own. I'll close with saying that many observations, how many, this is just a guesstimate up here, lead to something called experience, and I'll turn the microphone back over to Marilyn.